thank you all for coming this morning, and I also want to thank both of the candidates for being here. I specifically want to thank Carlos Cruz and Ramon Johnson, who worked with the Chamber to put together this morning's event. A lot of back and forth, a lot of hard work on their part, and we really appreciate their efforts. So the purpose of today's debate is a little bit different. This is not a general debate, but rather one that is very specifically geared towards the economy and business issues. As the Chamber of Commerce, obviously, this is our home turf, and one that we really wanted to have both candidates talk about and learn their views on different important economic issues. We're going to run this so that they can actually spend more time than they're usually given in interviews and press releases. So we want to get some good thinking from both candidates. And frankly, we also want the candidates to learn from us through our questions what issues concern the business community, what kind of things that we're looking at, what we think are important. So I'm going to give you a real quick rundown on this morning's format. Both candidates will give a 2-minute introduction. We did a coin flip to determine the order of that. They will be timed at 30 seconds. Kate back there in the back will flash a yellow card to let you know that you have 30 seconds left, and then she will flash a red card when your time is up. What we're going to do this morning is we're going to examine 5 different topic areas. We will spend 15 minutes in each of those topics. This is more than usual, but frankly, it's hardly enough given the complexity of the issues that we're going to be talking about. We want the debate to primarily be a discussion between the candidates. I will begin each section with a question directed to each candidate, and they will have 2 minutes to answer. They will then be able to engage in discussion, commenting on each other's views and asking each other questions. If needed to keep the discussion going, I will ask additional questions. If either candidate goes off topic, it's my job to direct them back on topic. Each campaign was made aware of the topic areas to be discussed, but they were not provided with the specific questions that will be discussed. At the end of the debate, each candidate will have an opportunity to make a 2-minute summary statement. Now, as for the audience, we do, especially in this crowded room, expect a certain level of decorum. So that means no clapping, no cheering, and no rude noises during the discussion. Debates are not usually done at breakfast, and so absolutely no throwing of food, especially at me. With that understood, we will go ahead and get started. Mr. Chivukula won the coin toss, and so he will start with his 2-minute introductory statement.
Thank you very much. First, I would like to thank Gateway Chamber of Commerce for bringing us together, and it's very important that the 2 candidates, I want to thank Congressman Leonard who's been serving the 7th District, to bring about a discussion about topics of interest to the citizens, so that way the democracy and democratic process continues forward. I began by starting in India. I was born in India, came to the United States, make a choice, applied to one college, to go to City College, New York, and got admission. And life is all about choices, and made one college admission because I had limited resources, and studied at City College, got my master's degree in electrical engineering. Then I worked in the industry for 30 years and wanted to give back to the community and ran for public office, was elected as a council member, mayor, and subsequently was elected to the state legislature, where I have been serving for the last 10 years. I have a number of legislation that have become law, and I work with both Democratic as well as Republican governors. And I believe that we have to look at what the opportunity, the American dream. People like myself, I have the opportunity to experience and live the American dream. I want to make sure that is continued for future generations. And this country is built on optimism and opportunity, and there is a tremendous amount of pessimism that pervades us. We should all be concerned about that. We should demand more from our elected officials so that way they solve the problems of the people. As an engineer, I solve the problems, and I want to do that. And I've been in the AT&T Bell Labs for a number of years. I worked in the 7th Congressional District. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lance.
Thank you very much, and good morning to you all. And it's always a pleasure to be at the Gateway Chamber of Commerce. And thank you for inviting me back regarding this forum. My thanks to you, Jim, for hosting the event. And I'm pleased to be here with my colleague from the state legislature, Assemblyman Chivukula. The congressional districts change. We go from 13 to 12, and as a result, the 12 congressional districts that remain are greatly enlarged. This district goes from 54 municipalities to 75 municipalities. And here in Union County, I am pleased that the district will continue to include the suburban municipalities in this county: Berkeley Heights, Clark, Cranford, Garwood, Kenilworth, Mountainside, New Providence, Scotch Plains, Springfield, Summit, Union, Westfield, and Winfield. Not all of Scotch Plains, a little bit of Scotch Plains, and a good deal more of Union Township. The principal issue confronting the American nation is the state of our economy. And I'm pleased we will be concentrating on issues related to the economy this morning. The economy is not as strong as anybody would like. In the 25 town hall meetings I've held over the last 2 years, in many of the telephone town hall meetings I've also held, the principal question I am asked is, how can we improve the state of the American economy? Since coming to Congress, I have worked in a bipartisan capacity to support policies to jumpstart our economy and to get more Americans working. We know that small business is the engine of creating jobs. 7 in 10 new jobs will be created by small business in this country. Too many small businesses are struggling to expand under the weight of higher taxes, red ink, overregulation, runaway federal spending, and rising energy prices. That's why I am proud of my record of support in a bipartisan capacity to move the economy forward. I look forward to our discussion this morning on the important economic issues facing the nation. Thank you.
Thank you. So we will now begin with the questions. The first area of discussion is healthcare. And Mr. Chivukula, I would like to address the first question to you. And that is that the centerpiece of the Affordable Care Act is the personal mandate requiring that pretty much all Americans pay for health insurance. Many economists have pointed out that this mandate is in fact a regressive tax which shifts wealth from the young, less affluent to the older and more affluent people in the country. Can you explain why this is being done and why it's important?
Thank you very much, Jim. When you look at the Affordable Health Care Act, it is about providing health care not just to young people, but it's also providing health care to senior citizens and women, and these issues are very important. When you have a healthcare program, if your insurance is spreading the risk across the board, and we need to have young people as well as people who are sick and people who are not so sick. And so having more people in the system and moving them from primary care. Right now, a lot of the people who are uninsured end up in emergency rooms. If you can shift the emergency room care to primary care, you are going to bring down the cost of providing health insurance. That's why we need more people on the insurance, so that way people who are uninsured and underinsured will be covered by providing access. The Affordable Health Care Act does not just give you health insurance, it provides you access to health care through health insurance exchanges where you can have an opportunity to shop around and buy the health insurance. It is a very important part, because when you look at some of the movement opponent, Congressman Lance, he claims that he voted 32 times against the Health Care Act, but he has not provided any opportunity to how we can address the issue of bringing down the health care cost by moving it from emergency care to primary care. Also, a lot of the issues with respect to preventive care aspects are going to cut down the cost of health care over a period of time, and also trying to protect the seniors from their Medicare being changed to voucher care, and trying to help women's healthcare issues, especially poor women trying to fund a Planned Parenthood. All these issues are very important, and those are covered under the Affordable Health Care Act.
So, Mr. Lance, I think Mr. Chivukula raises a good point, and actually the question that I was going to ask of you. You have voted numerous times to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Can you explain how we can solve the healthcare crisis if a large portion of people do not participate in the system?
Yes, thank you. I did not support the Health Care Act. What I have said is that it should be repealed and replaced. Accent on replaced as well. The status quo ante is simply not good enough, and I think we have to work together in a bipartisan capacity to move forward to reform the health care system. My concern with the act as it was enacted, and it was enacted on a purely partisan basis, is that it is a tax, and I do not favor raising taxes in our society. The only reason that it was held to be constitutional was not under the Commerce Clause, but under the Taxation Clause, and there will be several Americans who will be taxed as the result of it. I also have great concerns about other aspects of the legislation, IPAB, the board that will be established, unelected officials in Washington, 15. I do not think that is a good idea, and incidentally, in a bipartisan capacity in the House of Representatives, we do not think that is a good idea. Congressman Pallone does not think that is a good idea. That was added to the legislation in the United States Senate. I favored an alternative that was put forth by a group with which I am associated. The moderate Republicans in the House of Representatives were called the Tuesday Lunch Group. And we had an alternative, and I was a co-sponsor of our alternative, that would have bolstered health savings accounts, capped medical malpractice judgments, tort reform, not an inch of tort reform in the legislation, allows insurance companies to sell policies across state lines. It permits small businesses to pool together, and that's important to this audience, and it creates insurance pools for sick people who cannot buy insurance on their own. I'm honored to serve on the Committee of Jurisdiction for this important issue, the Energy and Commerce Committee, and on its Health Subcommittee, and I am the only Republican, the only person in the majority from either New York or New Jersey to serve on this incredibly important committee that will deal with this issue. My own judgment, because this United States Senate is going to be evenly divided, roughly evenly divided, is that the legislation is likely to be modified next year, and I hope to be part of that process. Also, I certainly do not favor the medical device tax that's contained in the legislation, terribly damaging to this congressional district, to this state, and in my judgment, to the nation.
Thank you.
I think Congressman Leonard Lance has a Cadillac insurance, Congress does, and he wants to deny insurance to other people, which is a very important thing. He says he works in a bipartisan manner. I did not see anything bipartisan. He's been voted for the Paul Ryan budget, which converts the Medicare into voucher care, cuts funding for the Planned Parenthood, where poor women can get health care opportunities. And I do not understand that. I think saying we're going to come up with a plan next year. If you replace it now, I mean, how long will it take for a law to come about? This may take a long time. And I think, Congressman, you should be fighting for the working men and women in the 7th District. I do understand the medical devices tax. I also oppose that. And I think what we need to think about is we need to think about all the people, not some people. Thank you.
Thank you. I didn't realize we were going to engage in personalities. As a matter of fact, I do not have the health care plan that is provided to members of Congress. I've chosen not to take that, so that statement you have just made is erroneous, and I would prefer to concentrate on the issues. The health care plan that I have is a private plan that my wife and I have together from the private sector, not from the governmental sector, not from state government and not from the federal government. So the statement you have made is erroneous, and I would prefer to concentrate on the issue at hand. And certainly I think that we have to work together in a bipartisan capacity, and that is why I am hopeful next year that we can at least amend the Affordable Care Act. And I'm pleased, Assemblyman, that you oppose the medical device tax. Let me say that it is only because we Republicans control the House of Representatives that that medical device tax has passed out of the House in its repeal, and that repeal has not occurred in the United States Senate, given the political complexion of the United States Senate. Were the Assemblyman's party to control the House of Representatives next year, there would be absolutely no chance, in my opinion, that the medical device tax would be repealed. It is a punishing tax. It is on gross assets that come into a medical device company, not on profits, and so it's an extremely high tax, and companies in this congressional district, Bard, for example, and other medical device companies have indicated to me how terribly punishing it will be. I do think we need health care reform. My own view is that we can at least amend the bill to make it better, and I, of course, favor the bill of which I was a co-sponsor, put forth by the Tuesday Group Republicans 2 years ago.
Actually, I want to take a question back up to 50,000 feet, and that is one area that's never discussed, or that I don't hear discussed, is personal responsibility. With 60% of the American people overweight or obese, with a great rise in diabetes and other areas that could be treated if we took better care of ourselves, why doesn't any of this legislation help people become more responsible for their own well-being?
First of all, I want to say that Congressman may not have the congressional insurance, but I think he hasn't done anything about making sure the rest of the Congress doesn't have it either. So I just wanted to say that. And the important thing is that personal responsibility and how much of you can you really regulate or legislate is a very difficult thing. I think one of the great aspects of the Affordable Health Care Act is that you can invest in preventive health care, where mammograms and pap smears and colonoscopy and cancer screening, that is going to cut down the cost of health care. I think it's important.
Congressman Lance, and then we're going to finish up.
Yes, first of all, let me say that Upendra is in great shape, and certainly I admire the fact that those of us who are in good shape, as he is.
I'm a hard-working man, Congressman. I keep myself, because I can't afford to have my wife's health insurance.
We together pay for our health insurance, and I am hardworking as well, and I congratulate the Assemblyman. He's just had a birthday, and congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, we need greater personal responsibility in this society, and certainly my political views in general are based upon greater personal responsibility in so many areas, and this is one of those areas. I commend the First Lady, Mrs. Obama, for her stressing a better quality of a diet, particularly for young people, and I hope we can discuss the issue further.
Okay, great. So moving on to the second topic, which is tax policy. Mr. Lance, the House of Representatives is responsible for the nation's tax system. Everyone pays the amount that Congress has set forth for them, be that me, you, Mitt Romney, or anybody in this room. So Congress is responsible for the fact that nearly half of the households in the country, infamous 47%, pay no income tax. Has Congress gone too far in trying to cut taxes, or is it time to return to a broader tax base?
Thank you. Regarding the American people desperately want to work. We are a very hard-working society, and it may be true that 46 or 47% of the American people currently do not pay the federal income tax, but many of those people pay payroll taxes, Social Security tax, and Medicare tax. And I clearly want to be on record as saying that I hope to continue to work on behalf of all of the American people, 100% of the American people. I don't favor raising taxes on anybody. And we're going to have a debate on that issue in the session of Congress that will convene after the election in the middle of November, extending into December. whether or not taxes should be raised on some Americans or on all Americans. I don't favor raising taxes on any Americans. The marginal tax rate of 35% is, in my judgment, quite high enough. If we were to raise taxes on some Americans, this would be particularly harmful to New Jersey. New Jersey residents pay the second highest tax burden in the nation. Sometimes it's first. It usually goes back between Connecticut and New Jersey. And in this congressional district, this is one of the congressional districts that would be hurt the hardest if taxes were raised. What I do favor is extending all of the current tax rates at least for another year, and then next year the Ways and Means Committee, the Committee of Jurisdiction for these matters, will, I hope, engage in fundamental tax reform, both at the individual level and at the corporate level. And Dean Jim Hughes of Rutgers University's Blaustein School has said that high earners in the Garden State will see their tax burden increase disproportionately compared to the rest of the country if taxes are increased on a portion of the American people at the end of December. Let me be clear, I don't favor raising taxes on anybody. I would imagine the compromise that would be reached, I hope the compromise that would be reached is to extend all current tax rates for 1 year, and then next year to have systemic tax reform, broadening the base, perhaps lowering rates, but certainly broadening the base. That can be done, and that would mean that some deductions might not continue to exist for high-income earners.
Thank you. Mr. Chivukula, I actually have a two-part question for you.
Do I have to say something about that? No.
Well, first you got to answer my question. Then you can talk about whatever you want. So I have a two-part question. A key plank in the Democratic platform is for the wealthy to pay their fair share of taxes. In fact, fair share is probably the most used phrase in this year's campaign. Can you define what fair share means? How much should the top 1% pay?
Well, I think the tax code has to be changed. I think when you look at Warren Buffett, who is a billionaire, and his tax rate is at 17%, and his secretary's tax rate is 31%. There's something wrong with the system. I think they need to bring about some tax parity, tax rate parity. That is very much needed. And but I do not believe that raising taxes will get us out of the problems. I think we need to figure out, I know Congressman Lance is talking about reducing some deductions, and I haven't seen any specifics on that. But I think we need to go back to the drawing board, look at the overall tax system. We have to simplify the tax code, and we need to see how we can balance the budget. I mean, we have a tremendous deficit that we need to address, and also we need to look at how we can, especially the District 7, they pay one of the highest alternate minimum taxes. So we need to figure out how to do that, and also look at the long-term capital gains. A whole bunch of things have to be looked at.
But specifically, can you tell me what share of the total taxes collected you think the top 1% should pay?
I think fair share.
And what is the fair share? I'm sorry, because
I understand that,
but I don't know what it means.
Well, I think that's where you need to look at all the things when Congressman Lance talks about eliminating some deductions. What are the deductions? We don't know. I think that's what we need to work together in a bipartisan manner, try to see how we can protect all levels, income levels. We need to make sure there's some tax parity.
So the second part of my question, by the way, just for clarification, the top 1% pays 40% of the total taxes collected. The top 10% pays 90% of the total income taxes collected. So it isn't a fair share, but by definition. But anyway, the second part of the question is that the 7th Congressional District is one of the wealthiest congressional districts in the country. And so if the tax burden on the top 1% is raised, it will hit the 7th Congressional District very hard. Right. Are you in favor of that?
No, I'm not in favor. I think I wanted to make sure that we extend the Bush-era tax cuts not just for 1 year like Congressman Lance talks about. I think we need to solve this problem. It can't be punting year by year. I think that creates uncertainty in the economy. A small business person wants to invest. They don't know what the tax coming up next year and beyond. I think so we need to look at that. I think because of the cost of living in the state, $250,000 is not enough. I think you have to go up to $1 million.
So, Mr. Lance, you already alluded to this, but at the end of the year, the Bush-Obama tax cuts are expiring. In addition, there are a number of other taxes that are going to be increased, and government spending is slated to be cut dramatically. If we go over a fiscal cliff because of these cuts, the economy could very well go back into deep recession. So what is Congress going to do between now and the end of the year to fix this?
I certainly do not favor going over the fiscal cliff for reasons you have suggested. I think it would lead to a continuation of the recession, and we're trying to get out of the recession. Technically, we're not in a recession at the moment, but we certainly do not have strong economic progress. And I believe we would go back into recession, or perhaps even a depression, God forbid, if we were to go over the fiscal cliff. I favor extending all of the Bush tax cuts permanently. My suggestion is the compromise that will be reached is to extend them for 1 year. And regarding the other taxes that may increase, I think we should look at that situation as well. The other half of this is sequestration of funds, and I am firmly of the belief in a bipartisan capacity that we should not engage in sequestration. The House of Representatives has already passed legislation in this regard as it relates to our responsibilities to preserve the nation's defense, and I would urge the Senate to act on that as quickly as possible. I am confident that men and women working together in goodwill can avoid the fiscal cliff, and I certainly will work to the greatest extent possible in that regard. And I would hope that that will be true regardless of who is elected president in 4 weeks.
Mr. Chivukula, same question. You've already answered part of it about extending the Bush-Obama tax cuts.
I think we are already on the cliff. The question is, are we going to fall off the cliff? I think that's. I won't be able to do anything about it because it's going to trigger in on January 1st, and Congressman Leonard Lance has the opportunity to fix that before January 1st. But I think the key here is that when you talk about taxation, we don't want, Congressman Leonard Lance voted for the Paul Ryan budget, which really taxing the senior citizens who are living on fixed incomes and cutting their Medicare and turning it into voucher care, and trying to cut some of the program that disadvantageously address women's health care issues. I think these are some of the things you need to look at when you talk about fairness.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next area, which is the debt and deficit. Mr. Chivukula, I will start with you this time. The United States debt is somewhere in the range of $16 trillion, a little bit north of that. Is this a problem? And if so, why? And how immediate is the problem?
Well, to address the issue of debt, you have to look at our GDP. It's $15.2 trillion, and the growth rate is about 2.8%. And when you look at countries like China and other countries, they're growing at 8% beyond. So we need to think about, look at the Simpson-Bowles Commission report and trying to invest in the economy. You have to grow the economy. You cannot come out of this thing by cutting your way out of it. And we have to address the issue of debt. We have to have fiscal restraint. We don't want to make sure that eliminate some of the programs that are not working and reduce the regulatory burden on the businesses, small businesses as well as large businesses. Try to attract investment. There's $2 trillion sitting outside the United States. We can, through some tax policies, we can bring that investment here, create the jobs here so that our economy grows much higher than 2.8%. I think that's critical, and so far I haven't seen anything. This Congress is one of the least productive in over 100 years. They haven't really, this is the first time this entire year they had only 5-day work week, and take long vacation before the elections for 6 weeks vacation, and then you're looking at they didn't pass the farm bill. Farmers are really affected because of the drought situation. They have not really done anything with the farm bill, and worried about what's going to happen to the crops and the cost of produce in this state and elsewhere. I think it's very important that we address it, but you cannot just look at it just in a silo. You need to look at the overall picture, and that requires bipartisanship, and I'd love to see Congressman Leonard Lance showing more bipartisanship. I haven't seen anything. He's been lined up with the Tea Party, and he's just Paul Ryan embraced him, endorsed him, and then you have Eric Cantor coming to the district, and it is all Tea Party. So I don't know why, where is this bipartisanship has been for the last 4 years. The Leonard Lance, I know from the legislature, he would not recognize Congressman Lance, who's standing next to him.
Mr. Lance, the same question. $16 trillion debt, is it a problem? How big of a problem, and how immediate of a problem?
Yes, it is the sword of Damocles hanging over not only this generation, but future generations, and I see young people in the audience. I have devoted my public policy responsibilities regarding issues of debt and deficits, first at the state level, and more recently in Washington, and this is the issue that really concerns me the most. As a percentage of gross domestic product, our annual deficits at the federal level are the highest they've been since the end of World War II. The $16 trillion debt is increasing, and it's increasing at the rate of about $1 trillion a year. The President said when he was running for office 4 years ago that he would have the annual deficit by the end of his first term. That simply has not happened, ladies and gentlemen, and it is greatly disturbing. The best way to have lower annual deficits is to have a more vibrant economy. That is the best way to increase revenues into federal coffers without raising taxes. And if we could have an unemployment rate of 5 or 6%, then that would do a great deal in lowering annual deficits. And I am committed, based upon not raising taxes, particularly on small business men and women, to help the private sector create the jobs that America so desperately needs, so that we can make sure as many Americans who want to work are able to work, and as a result they will be paying taxes, and that 53 or 54% who currently pay the personal income tax will increase to 60% or 65%, and that will help us enormously. I do favor a glide path back to a balanced budget, but I'm under no illusion that it can occur overnight. It will take some time. And regarding my bipartisanship, I was criticized in the Republican primary for voting for the compromise last year that continues to fund the government. I believe the government has certain essential responsibilities, and I am proud to have cast that vote as part of a bipartisan majority, and of course that legislation was signed by President Obama into law. My public policy in Trenton was on this issue. I sued Governor McGreevey, who borrowed inappropriately the general operating portions of the state budget without voter approval. The Assemblyman voted for all of that terrible McGreevey borrowing. I was the leading voice of fiscal responsibility in Trenton on that issue. And then later, in my constitutional amendment at the state level, the Lance Amendment prohibits further state borrowing without voter approval. This is the issue that has animated my public service, first in Trenton and more recently in Washington.
Mr. Lance, a follow-up question. The deficit, which feeds the debt, is driven in large part by military and entitlement spending. I'd like to focus first on the military. The United States spends more on defense than the combined spending of the next 10 countries, including China and Russia. Is this excessive?
I do believe that as we discuss ways to return to fiscal responsibility, all aspects of federal spending have to be on the table, and that includes defense spending. And we are now out of Iraq in a combat capacity, and we're likely to come out of Afghanistan probably by the end of 2013, and that, I hope, will reduce spending for the Pentagon. And I think that the Pentagon's budget should be on the table as well as other aspects of spending. Regarding the Pentagon, I voted against funding a plane. This was favored by Speaker Boehner. It would have brought jobs to Ohio, particularly to Western Ohio, but I did not think that that expenditure was necessary, and I voted against the Speaker of the House of Representatives, John Boehner. I always try to vote my conscience. Regarding the entitlement issues, and I hope we can have a further discussion about that, also we need to make sure that Social Security and Medicare are protected, not only for this generation, but for the next generation as well, and I certainly have ideas regarding that.
Well, actually, that's where we are going to go right now with Mr. Chivukula.
I just want to think one of the things Congressman Lance talks about creating jobs, and he had the opportunity to vote for the American Jobs Act, under President Obama's leadership, and he has not voted for that. And how he hasn't proposed any legislation to see how jobs can be created.
We actually have a segment a little bit later on employment, but right now I'd like to stay with the...
Also, I think I just want to rebut what he said about McGreevey budgets. We were handed, coming out of Governor DeFrancesco, before the lame duck, they had actually increased a lot of the budget, and we had to pay for that, and we had to come up with ways to see how we can balance it. The idea is to try to pay this funding, school funding, try to see how we can provide benefits to people, and that's what I voted for. I think we have to protect the working families.
So on entitlements, the biggest driver of the deficit is entitlement spending. Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid are all growing at a tremendous rate, and as our baby boom generation is beginning to retire, the costs are exploding. No economist will tell you that the present system is sustainable, but you have called for it to be sustained. How can this be done?
Well, I think you got to go back to the actuarial studies when they estimated the life expectancy of people, and because of the advances in medical technologies, the life expectancy has increased. So we need to go back to the drawing board and try to see how we can come up with the actual actuarial numbers that will come up with how to sustain or how to sustain the social benefits. And the challenge is that you cannot just take a chainsaw and cut it. You need to figure out, you need to come up with surgical cuts. When you're cutting, you need to have everything on the table and try to see how we can have a balanced approach to cutting, so that way you do not put one segment of the population against another segment and cause undue hardship.
Mr. Lance, you said you had some ideas on how to sustain entitlements?
Yes, let me say that I am a strong supporter of Social Security, of Medicare, and of Medicaid, and these are programs that should continue not only for the current generation, but for future generations as well. When Social Security was enacted in 1935, the life expectancy in this country was dramatically less than it is today. When Medicare was enacted a generation later in 1965, the life expectancy had increased, but it was certainly not as great as it is today. I personally am in an age cohort where my retirement age for Social Security is not 65, it's 66. And for those a little younger than I, it is 67. I understand my time is up, but I would like to discuss this issue further.
Okay, well, we can, if you're both in agreement, we can take another couple minutes and continue to discuss entitlements.
And if I might continue, what I have suggested regarding Social Security is that those who are in their 20s might have to wait a year or two more to receive their full Social Security benefits. Now, I hope that's not misinterpreted by anybody in the room as cutting Social Security. I'm talking about young people in their 20s. I was informed a generation and a half ago by President Reagan, a strong Republican, and by Speaker of the House Tip O'Neill, a strong Democrat, that my retirement age for full Social Security benefits would be 66, not 65. I was given more than a generation's advanced notice. I respectfully suggest that we might look at a retirement age of 68 or 69 for people in their 20s. And I do not want this to be misrepresented as in any way cutting Social Security benefits for those currently on Social Security or anywhere near Social Security retirement age. Regarding Medicare, on our current path, the path of President Obama, full benefits will not be given to those currently in retirement beginning in 2013. It will be about 87% of full benefits beginning roughly 10 years from now. And that is simply unacceptable. Those who currently rely on Medicare and those who are about to enter the Medicare system or approaching the age of 65, they should be confident that they will receive full benefits, and I want to work in a bipartisan capacity to make sure that that occurs.
It's quite interesting that Congressman Lance voted for the Paul Ryan budget, which affects people who are 45 to 56, and it kicks in the year 2023, and it is going to affect them quite a bit. The amount of money they're going to be paying is $59,000 by 2023. Things like that you need to look at, and he says that he's for 20 years, people who are 20 years today, and he voted for a budget that starts affecting people who are between the ages of 45 and 56. I think it's very important to have consistency and make sure that there's some kind of certainty in this whole thing.
On that, let me say that the Paul Ryan budget this year permits all Americans to continue in the current Medicare system. There is an option for premium support, but the Paul Ryan budget this year permits all Americans, whether they're in their 20s or 30s or whatever their age, to continue in the Medicare system as it currently exists. And that was a compromise that was reached with Senator Ron Wyden, the Democratic United States Senator from Oregon. And I want to give Senator Wyden, a prominent Democrat, the credit he deserves in working with Paul Ryan on this issue. And this will not be the end result, but this was a proposal put forth by Paul Ryan and Ron Wyden. They are working in a bipartisan capacity to try to address the issue so that in 2023, current retirees on Medicare do not see their benefits reduced.
So I told you 10 minutes would not be enough to discuss any of these topics. I would, however, like to move on to the problem of unemployment. Mr. Chivukula, survey after survey indicates that the nation's biggest concern is getting people back to work. With official unemployment hovering around 8% and real unemployment probably around 10%, what does Congress need to do to bring these rates down?
Well, I think right now the unemployment rate is 7.8%. We should not be happy about it. We should be very unhappy about that. And we have to figure out a way how we can create jobs at home. And a lot of the corporations are creating jobs overseas. We should bring those jobs back here. We should go back to the drawing board and think about how to bring back the manufacturing. New Jersey was thriving when we had manufacturing. Now we have no manufacturing, or very minimal manufacturing. I think also we have to invest in education. We have to create children who have the skill set. They can compete in a global economy. And that's why we need the vocational schools funding. We need to make sure that not everybody is going to go to four-year college. If they can get the vocational training, that they can make use of, become employed by the manufacturing companies, that is going to help a lot. And also we need to think about, Congressman Lance voted for Paul Ryan's budget, which cut the SBA funding by 50%. And the small businesses are having tough time getting loans, and the small businesses are the ones create 70% of the jobs in the United States. And if they can get credit, and their payroll taxes are going up, and the healthcare premiums are going up, how are they going to come up with jobs? Also, small businesses are the ones are home for innovation, and we are in the 7th district, is home to AT&T Bell Labs, where tremendous innovation that took place, whether Nobel laureates and patents that were produced. And so we have to go back to that innovation and try to create jobs, self-employment. I think that's an important thing. So we need to create the skill level that is needed to be able to sustain that. And you can't cut your way out of that, and you need to figure out a way how to motivate. And you can't be pessimistic. Oh my God, keep blaming Obama. Congressman, you're elected to office. You got to do something. You just can't say Obama and then you throw your hands up in the air. You have to create that optimism so that way everybody has the opportunity to experience the American dream. You have experience, and myself, I have experience.
Mr. Mr. Land, same question. How can we get the unemployment rate down?
First of all, by not raising taxes. And if the Democrats were to control the House of Representatives, taxes would go up, particularly on small businesses. Let me repeat, 7 in 10 new jobs in this country will be created by small business. And if the marginal tax rate were to increase on filers with incomes of over $250,000, that would hurt small businesses, many of which pay their taxes through Subchapter S, not corporations, and not through the corporate tax code. And so first and foremost, we need certainty in the tax system. I am convinced that this will unleash funds that are currently on the sidelines if there were greater certainty if tax rates were not to rise. I'm pleased that the unemployment rate went down to 7.8%. I am discouraged by the fact that the number of new jobs last month was fewer than the month before, and that month was fewer than the month before that. Obviously, every time the unemployment rate goes down, it is a step in the right direction. The labor participation rate in this country is not nearly what it should be because people are discouraged and some have given up looking for jobs and some are underemployed. The figures I have is that the labor participation rate at the moment is 63.6%, and when President Obama took office it was 65.7%. I have been critical of President Obama in not addressing this issue first and foremost. I think it should have been the focus of his presidency as the top priority. But let me say I want to work with whoever is elected president on November 6th to move the country forward. The best way, in my judgment, to have the private sector create new jobs is to have greater certainty at the federal level regarding tax policy, not raising tax policies on anybody. And I am convinced, and this audience is proof of that, that it is small business that will create the new jobs that we need.
The numbers that we have been discussing are short-term numbers. They're the unemployment rate right now. But if we look further into the future, the business community, quite frankly, is very concerned with employment opportunities in the future. And Mr. Chivukula, you alluded to this in your first answer, but I would like to go into it in a little bit more detail. Many believe that we are on the very beginning of a third industrial revolution, which will bring manufacturing back to the United States. However, it will be a very different kind of manufacturing. There's actually a joke. I'm going to lighten the room a little bit here, I hope. And that is that the factory of the future will have 2 employees. It will have a man and a dog. The man's job is to watch the machine. The dog's job is to keep the man from touching the machine. So what we are moving into as an economy is a very technically oriented mode of production. And yet, 30% of our youth drop out of high school with no skills. They are not going to be able to get factory jobs of any type. And most of our college graduates are studying majors that, again, are not valuable for the workforce. So communications, psychology tend to be the most popular undergraduate majors, and they give you no skills to go into the labor force. So looking at the employment question longer term, what can Congress help do to change this situation so that our youth are prepared for the coming workforce?
Yeah, I was talking to a resident of 7th District, and she was telling me that after Soviet Union launched Sputnik, and immediately there's tremendous focus on the science and technology education. Everybody was to take at least 3 or 4 courses in mathematics and try to improve. I think you got to go back to the basics, and we need to have science and technology education very critical because we are living in an information age and everything, technological advances, we can't keep up with them. They're so fast. And so that type of education is necessary. The reason some of the kids may be dropping out of school could be that they're bored in the regular type of curriculum. Maybe you need to come up with a curriculum that interests them. try to come up with vocational schools that some people who are not going to colleges, but they can be good with their hands and they can do lots of things. I think investment in that type of education, identifying the aptitude of an individual and how they can be productive members of the society, and that's very important. You're right. I mean, when we started as an agrarian society, the labor component of any product was 90%. Now it is hardly 10% because of the advances in technology. You got robotics everywhere and all that. I think so. We need to train them. Also, there's opportunity in innovation. I think that's one of the things you need to encourage. They say that in New Jersey, if you lose a job, you get a resume. In California, you lose a job, you get a business plan. You have to promote that innovation and entrepreneurship. I think we need to do that, and we're not doing enough.
Congressman Lance, same question. Education in the United States is locally controlled, locally funded for the most part. Can Congress promote science and technology education?
Absolutely, and Congress does have a role to play, but from my perspective, the principal role is at the state and local levels, and Congress can be helpful, but I think that it is a better system that reposes responsibilities primarily at the state and local level, and certainly that is our tradition here in New Jersey. Let me say that I am very much impressed with the schools in this congressional district. I will be visiting tomorrow the Magnet School here in Union County, a school I have visited in the past, and I think that the municipalities in this congressional district, including the municipalities here in Union County, do a terrific job. Regarding innovation, we are the innovation center of the world here in the United States. We have greater productivity than other countries, and we should recognize the strength of the American workforce. The American people want to work. The reason that unemployment is so high, in my judgment, is that we have not focused as we should, particularly in Washington. I think the president should have focused almost exclusively on the issues of employment. We can out-innovate and outperform any other country on earth. There are funds on the sidelines because of the lack of certainty in Washington, and what we can do most of all is to create better certainty as to tax policy, certainty as to administrative rules and regulations, and certainly regarding healthcare policy, and I think that that will do a great deal in helping private industry create the jobs we need. Also, we need to bring back to this country profits that have been made abroad by companies that I think should bring those profits back to the United States so that more Americans can be working, and that is why we need a reform of our corporate tax policy as well.
So we will now move on to the financial services section. This will be our last topic of discussion. Small business employs about half of the workforce in the United States. Small business is the first to expand employment at the end of a recession. But to expand, small business needs access to credit. Mr. Lance, we bailed out the banks, but the banks are not lending to anyone, and especially not to small business. Many bankers blame the Dodd-Frank bill, for severely limiting their ability to lend. Do you agree?
Yes, I do, and I did not vote for Dodd-Frank. Let me say that we needed reform, and there are certain good provisions in Dodd-Frank, but overall, I did not favor it. And one of the reasons I did not favor it is that I, with others, not I alone certainly, but I was one of those who thought that it would lead to a situation where banks would be reluctant to lend to business, particularly small business, and indeed that has proven to be the case, unfortunately, and I am sure those in this room know more about that than I. I also think that Dodd-Frank institutionalized too big to fail, and we do not yet know what the systemic institutions are, that if they get in trouble again, the government might bail them out. I am completely opposed to that, and that was another reason I voted against Dodd-Frank. And so I do think that we have to modify it, at the very least, to to make sure that banks can lend appropriately, particularly to small businesses, and banks are reluctant to do so. Also, Dodd-Frank did not fully audit the Fed. I am a co-sponsor of the legislation, sponsored by Congressman Ron Paul of Texas, to audit the Fed, and I do think that that should become law, and I urge the United States Senate to pass that law. The American people deserve a better plan that ends bailouts, that would not permit bailouts in the future. The American people deserve an auditing of the Fed, and also reining in of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were at least partially responsible for the meltdown in 2008. I think that the Congress encouraged Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to secure mortgages inappropriately. This was done before I got into Congress, and let me say that I think that there should be reform in that area as well.
Thank you. Mr. Chivukula, same
There was an article in Starledge a couple of days ago that the number of SBA loans have increased in the state of New Jersey. The key is that if you cut the funding for the SBA, I don't know how they are able to do their job. That's one thing. The second thing is that definitely the Dodd-Frank has to be amended. There are a lot of things that we're not able to allow small businesses to procure loans. And I think we need to make sure that the credit is available so that way they can sustain, and not only sustain, grow their businesses. I think we have to do that. And whatever solution that comes out, bipartisan manner, I'm 100% for it. I think we cannot be saying that I am this party and that party and I'm stuck with this ideology. I think what we need to do is that sit across the table and iron out the details and make sure that the credit is provided. That's one of the things among the stimulus package that we did not ensure some of the things that make sure that the funds get to the small businesses. I think we need to revisit that.
Let me say regarding the stimulus package, I was in favor of an alternative stimulus package. I did not vote for the president's stimulus package, and I'm very concerned, for example, that $500 million was given to Solyndra, and I think that political pressure was exerted in that regard. That is certainly not Assemblyman Chivukula's fault, and I recognize that. This was the fault of the administration, and the fact that the federal loan in Solyndra was subordinated was unconscionable. I don't think it was good law. The committees of Congress, including the committee on which I serve, the Energy and Commerce Committee, is investigating that issue, and I believe when all of the facts are revealed, it will be demonstrated that the federal government should not have subordinated the money of the American people, of you and I together, to the tune of $500 million regarding Solyndra. And certainly in Congress we want to work in a bipartisan capacity, so that should never happen again. I'm pleased that the Assemblyman has indicated that Dodd-Frank should be amended. Certainly that is my view. I was on the Financial Services Committee my first term in Congress. It was a wonderful committee on which to serve. I have been promoted to Energy and Commerce. Energy and Commerce and Ways and Means are the two most powerful committees in the House, and it is incredibly important to the constituents I serve here in North Central New Jersey that I am a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee. I'm very grateful to my leadership for placing me on that committee. I'm the only person in the majority, the Republican side, to be on Energy and Commerce from New York or New Jersey, from Buffalo to Cape May. And we are the medicine chest of the world in this part of the United States, and those are principally where my responsibilities exist.
Are you making your closing statement already?
If I may, I just want to, one of the things that is lacking, this Congress has failed to come up with a national energy policy. And we need to address the issue of dependence on foreign oil. It's tremendous dependence, which is costing us billions of dollars. We're sending money. It's a national security issue because we're sending billions of dollars overseas to hostile nations. And we need to look at sustainable, no matter how you look at fossil fuels, coal and natural gas, they're all finite supply. So we need to figure out a way to come up with renewable sources of energy, solar. New Jersey, I was very proud to say that we created more than 10,000 jobs in creating the solar industry. We have we are one of the first states to pass the offshore wind energy. So we need to ask our Congress, make sure that they come up with energy policy. Energy policy is going to create a number of jobs that is going to put our men and women to work.
I would like to keep this section on financial services, and I do have one other topic that I would like to raise. One of the major causes for the near collapse of the banking industry was the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act during the Clinton administration, which allowed commercial banks to become investment banks and thus gamble on risky investments with depositor money. Mr. Chivukula, should commercial banking and investment banking again be separated, or should we allow banks to be too big to fail?
Well, I think they should be separated. I believe, because any kind of speculation, like if you look at the Paul Ryan's budget, taking the Medicare and turning it into privatization, converting into voucher care. These things are which Leonard Lance has voted for. Any kind of speculative, when you're taking people's money and you're speculating on Wall Street, it is always not a good thing.
Congressman Lance.
I do not favor returning to Glass-Steagall in its entirety. And I do not believe that will occur, and I think that is the overwhelming position of a majority of the Congress, and I believe that's the position of both President Obama and of Governor Romney. So I do not think we're going to return to Glass-Steagall. Having said that, I do not want to have a situation ever again where the American people bail out big institutions, commercial banks and investment banks together. That's now permitted. And my concern with Dodd-Frank is that it will inevitably result to a return of too big to fail. Now let me repeat that we do not know the banks that would be in that category because there is no official list, but I would presume it would be among the biggest institutions financially in this country. And I am adamantly opposed to that portion of Dodd-Frank that in effect permits a return to too big to fail. And that is the way I would address Glass-Steagall. There should be regulation, not over-regulation, but there certainly should be regulation. 100 years ago, London was the financial capital of the world, at least of the Western world. At some point in the 20th century, that leadership passed to us, particularly here in New York. New York is the financial capital of the Western world, indeed of the entire world today. My concern is that that position of leadership might go back to London or perhaps to Asia, and within Asia, I would say Shanghai, and I want to make sure over the course of the lives of those in this room, including the lives of the young people, that New York remain the financial capital of the world. It's incredibly important to the district I serve, incredibly important to New Jersey, incredibly important to this nation. The freedoms we share together are based upon our success financially in part, certainly based upon the American Constitution and our belief in God. And let me say, I want a system that we have financial regulation so that we might move forward in a progressive fashion.
All right, that concludes the debate portion of this morning. And so now each candidate will be given an opportunity to make a 2-minute summary statement. And Mr. Chivukula, we'd like to start with you.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks so much for the Gateway Chamber of Commerce and Congressman Leonard Lance for this opportunity to present my views and my positions on various issues. And I think America is a great country. A student from India coming to United States, not only get elected to local office, serving in the state office, has the opportunity to run for U.S. Congress. That only shows the greatness of this great nation. I am, its choice is very clear, and when I walk around meeting various constituents in the district, District 7, and people talk about lack of access to their representative. They have never seen the representative. I was able to go around meeting people and feel the pain. I mean, being a middle-class American, I know I've seen losing a job and working without any pay raise. All these things are there, and I am looking forward to working with the senior citizens and standing for senior citizens and women and investing in education, try to solve the problems, and in a bipartisan manner, not so much, I'm not being an engineer, I'm not tied to any particular ideology. I see a problem, I try to solve it, and I don't claim I try to do the best job I can, and I am looking forward to serving the District 7 residents and to the best extent possible, and I really thank you for this opportunity. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lance.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jim, and my thanks to the Gateway Regional Chamber of Commerce. My thanks also to Assemblyman Chivukula, and I believe his coming to this country and being a success is in the tradition of the United States, and I commend the Assemblyman for that. As your Congressman, I have worked tirelessly in support of bipartisan, pro-job measures that remove the cloak of uncertainty and achieve the economic growth that our nation so desperately needs. I have voted to extend the current tax rates for all Americans and pledged to move forward with tax code reform in 2013. I support a federal budget that tackles the nation's most pressing fiscal problems and begins to put our federal budget back into balance, and that will take some time, and I voted in favor of a balanced budget amendment. As a member of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, I have helped craft legislation that repeals cumbersome federal regulations, reduces federal red tape, and we have worked together on the committee to pass an all-of-the-above American-made energy policy to expand affordable energy and create jobs in this country. I am proud to have been endorsed by the National Federation of Independent Business, by the National Association of Manufacturers, and by the United States Chamber of Commerce. I firmly believe that public service is a public trust. I am proud of my record in Trenton, fighting against massive debt without voter approval. I am proud of my constitutional amendment in Trenton that prohibits that in the future, the most important constitutional amendment in our state constitution, in my judgment. And I am proud of my work in Washington, ethical integrity, fiscal responsibility, and certainly I work to the best of my ability on behalf of all of the residents of this congressional district. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, now you can release all that pent-up passion and join me in thanking Assemblyman Chivukula.